So if you're looking for an answer to a specific question regarding 1 Samuel 28 to 1 Samuel 31, then rest assured this video is probably going to give you the answer. But I want to let you know that this is part of a bigger series. It's day 94 of our Through the Bible in 1 Year study. So at the very least, I recommend you go back to at least the beginning of our 1 Samuel playlist, and I'll make sure I link it in the description box below. Let's get into it. And it came to pass in those days that the Philistines gathered their armies together for warfare to fight with Israel. And Achish said unto David, Know thou assuredly that thou shalt go out with me to battle, thou and thy men. And David said to Achish, Surely thou shalt know what thy servant can do. And Achish said to David, Therefore will I make thee keeper of mine head forever. Now Samuel was dead, and all Israel had lamented him and buried him in Ramah, even in his own city. And Saul had put away those that had familiar spirits and the wizards out of the land. And the Philistines gathered themselves together and came and pitched in Shunem. And Saul gathered all Israel together, and they pitched in Gilboa. And when Saul saw the host of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart greatly trembled. And when Saul inquired of the Lord answered him not, neither by dreams, nor by Urim, nor by prophets. Then said Saul unto his servant, Seek me a woman that hath a familiar spirit, that I may go to her and inquire of her. And his servant said to him, Behold, a woman that hath a familiar spirit at Endor. And Saul disguised himself and put on other raiment, and he went and 2 men with him. And they came to the woman by night. And he said, I pray thee, divine unto me by the familiar spirit, and bring me up whom I shall name unto thee. So what we see here to start are some really interesting facts. The first thing we see here is from verse 2, and it basically highlights that David is still with Achish basically in Philistine country. And if you move back to some of the previous videos in this playlist, you'll see that basically David had actually travelled out of the promised land. He'd gone to visit King Achish and was actually staying with him and actually going out to battle for him. And we also see the same constant theme throughout the whole book of 1 Samuel so far, which is Saul is actually still doing the wrong thing. It starts off in verse 4 to 5 in the chapter. You can see that Saul is actually trembling and fearful in regards to going out to battle. It's not like actually before when David was actually going out to battle for Israel and things were actually going great. You never heard Saul saying he was scared or anything like that, because David was actually there delivering him from a lot of those battles. And to continue with these first set of verses, look at what Saul says in verse 6 to 7. So in verse 6 to 7, you see that Saul has actually previously taken out all of the people and cast them out that were basically into familiar spirits and into witchcraft, but he's become so fearful, he actually starts now going back into those things and saying, you know what, go and find me someone who has a familiar spirit, who can raise up someone that I desperately desire. 9. And the woman said unto him, Behold, thou knowest what Saul hath done, how he hath cut off those that have familiar spirits, and the wizards out of the land. Wherefore then layest thou a snare for my life to cause me to die? And Saul sware to her by the Lord, saying, The Lord liveth, there shall no punishment happen to thee for this thing. Then said the woman, Whom shall I bring up unto thee? And he said, Bring me up Samuel. And when the woman saw Samuel, she cried with a loud voice. And the woman spake to Saul, saying, Why hast thou deceived me, for thou Saul? And the king said unto her, Be not afraid, for what sawest thou? And the woman said unto Saul, I saw gods ascending out of the earth. And he said unto her, What form he of? And she said, An old man cometh up, and he covered with a mantle. And Saul perceived that it is Samuel, and he stooped his face to the ground and bowed himself. And Samuel said to Saul, Why hast thou disquieted me to bring me up? And Saul answered, I am sore distressed, for the Philistines make war against me, and God is departed from me, and answereth me no more, neither by prophets nor by dreams. Therefore I have called thee, that thou mayest make known unto me what I shall do. Then said Samuel, Wherefore then dost thou ask of me, seeing the Lord is departed from thee, and is become thine enemy? So the first question that should spring to mind is, why would this woman literally listen to what Saul's actually saying? She clearly said that Saul actually had a mandate out that people's lives would be in danger if anyone was caught actually dibbling dabbling in witchcraft or wizardry. And Saul basically says, don't worry, he swears on the Lord and says, you know what, nothing will happen to you. So how could she trust in him if she didn't know he was Saul at the time, but he's still saying, don't worry, you're not going to get into harm? Only the king would be able to give that sort of leeway in that certain circumstance. Now, one thing that's really interesting in this piece of text is what actually happens next. See, she gets past the whole point of, oh, it was actually Saul that's actually requesting this. And Saul says, don't worry, just tell me what you saw. And she says something really interesting. In verse 13, she says something really interesting. She says that she sees these gods, little g, ascending out of the earth. And I put the reference here because it should remind you back to Genesis 28, when Jacob had a dream, basically, when he was on his travels. And he said he saw in this dream angels basically ascending and descending into the earth. And it's really interesting when you think about it like that, because there is that sort of connotation. This was Jacob having a dream that we believe ultimately was a godly dream at the time. And this is a woman basically using familiar spirits to basically see the same kind of thing. This basically gives you some context that whether you're doing something from a biblically accurate perspective, or there's people doing things from a wicked perspective or from a different perspective, there are certain times when you can literally tap into the same sort of thing. We also saw this in Exodus when Moses basically went to free the Israelites out of the captivity of the Egyptians. Moses was actually doing certain activities, or Aaron was actually doing certain activities through God's power. Pharaoh's servants were actually doing similar things as well through their own cunning work. Now, obviously, it got to a certain period where they weren't able to match the same power as God, which is obviously expected. And the final thing, which is actually really interesting, is what does Samuel say to Saul? In verse 16, he says, basically in simplified terms, you are the Lord's enemy. And some people might look at this and say, well, why is Saul the Lord's enemy? But again, I recommend go back to the beginning of our First Samuel playlist and literally work your way through the videos, and you'll see over and over again. Every single time Saul was actually trying to fight David, or Saul was trying to be disobedient to God in one way or another, that was him acting in opposition to God and ultimately becoming the Lord's enemy. So when the Lord basically said to Saul, you know what, this is it. What you did in regards to Amalek, where you didn't wipe everyone out when I told you to wipe out man, woman, and child, and we've got a specific video about that as well. I'll make sure I link that in the description box below. He was basically in opposition, fighting against God. And the Lord hath done to him as he spake by me, for the Lord hath rent the kingdom out of thine hand, and given it to thy neighbour, to David, because thou obeyest not the voice of the Lord, nor executest his fierce wrath upon Amalek. Therefore hath the Lord done this thing unto thee this day. Moreover, the Lord will also deliver Israel with thee into the hand of the Philistines, and tomorrow thou and thy sons with me. The Lord also shall deliver the host of Israel into the hand of the Philistines. Then Saul fell straightway all along on the earth, and was sore afraid because of the words of Samuel. And there was no strength in him, for he had eaten no bread all the day, nor all the night. 21. And the woman came unto Saul, and saw that he was sore troubled, and said unto him, Behold, thine handmaid hath obeyed thy voice, and I have put my life in my hand, and have hearkened unto thy words which thou spakest unto me. Now therefore I pray thee, hearken thou also unto the voice of thine handmaid, and let me set a morsel of bread before thee, and eat, that thou mayest have strength when thou goest on thy way. But he refused, and said, I will not eat. But his servants together with the woman compelled him, and he hearkened unto their voice. So he arose from the earth, and sat upon the bed. And the woman had a fat calf in the house, and she hasted and killed it, and took flour and kneaded, and did bake an unleavened bread thereof. And she brought before Saul and before his servants, and they did eat. Then they rose up and went away that night. And ultimately, what we've just read can be wrapped up in one sentence, and that is that tomorrow Saul dies, and that's from verse 19. So basically, Samuel basically delivered the word to him and said, look, you and your sons and all of Israel are going to be delivered into the hands of the Philistines. And tomorrow, basically, you and your sons are going to die and basically be with me. So that literally wraps up the first chapter in our Bible study video today. Let's go on to the next chapter, chapter 29, and see what it has in store for us. And this is a short chapter, so we'll just read the whole chapter and then I'll break it down. Now the Philistines gathered together all their armies to Aphek, and the Israelites pitched by a fountain which in Jezreel. And the lords of the Philistines passed on by hundreds and by thousands, but David and his men passed on in the river ward with Achish. Then said the princes of the Philistines, What these Hebrews? And Achish said unto the princes of the Philistines, Not this David, the servant of Saul, the king of Israel, which have been with me these days, or these years, and I have found no fault in him, since he fell unto this day. And the princes of the Philistines were wroth with him, and the princes of the Philistines said unto him, Make this fellow return, that he may go again to his place, which thou hast appointed him, and let him not go down with us to battle, lest in the battle he be an adversary to us. For wherewith should he reconcile himself unto his master? Not with the heads of these men? Not this David of whom they sang one to another in dances, saying, Saul slew his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Then Achish called David, and said unto him, Surely the Lord liveth, thou hast been upright, and thy going out and thy coming in with me in the host, good in my sight. For I have not found evil in thee since the day of thy coming unto me, unto this day. Nevertheless, the Lord's favour thee not. Wherefore now return and go in peace, that thou displease not the lords of the Philistines. And David said unto Achish, But what have I done, and what hast thou found in thy servant, so long as I have been with thee unto this day, that I may not go fight against the enemies of my lord the king? 9. And Achish answered and said to David, I know that thou good in my sight, as an angel of God. Notwithstanding, the princes of the Philistines have said, He shall not go up with us to battle. Wherefore now rise up early in the morning with thy master's servants that are come with thee, and as soon as ye be up early in the morning and have light, depart. So David and his men rose up early to depart in the morning to return into the land of the Philistines, and the Philistines went up to Jezreel. Now, although it's only a little bit of text, I made sure I broke down several different things in this piece of text, which are really insightful, so let's go through them. So firstly, we see in verse 2 that David is actually rejected by the laws of the Philistines. And I guess I'll continue to say that over and over again because context is really powerful. So if you haven't got the full context, make sure you go to the beginning of our First Samuel playlist and watch it all the way through. It's actually really beneficial. But he's actually been rejected by the Philistines kings, as we read in verse 2. And in verse 3, Achish, basically the king who David has actually been dwelling with in his territory, is basically trying to plead to the laws of the Philistines for David's case. But this key song here in verse 5 that is brought up again is really powerful. It keeps coming up over and over again. And this is a song that was before David was even anointed king. And this is a song that the women in Israel were singing years ago, many, many years ago, where they were basically saying, Saul has killed his hundreds of Philistines, David has killed his thousands of Philistines. And if you remember correctly, David obviously killed Goliath. We've done a couple of videos about that with some really interesting insights into that. I'll make sure I post them in the links in the description box as well. But because of this key insight in verse 5, something interesting really happened. Now, another thing I jotted down, which was basically icing on the cake here, which I never really had realized until this particular time reading through, is that I'd always read it and actually saw it as in the sense that the Philistine lords basically said, send David back to Israel. But that actually isn't the case. What they actually basically say to him is, they say to Achish, send David away from the battle and send him back to the place that you've allocated for him. So they weren't sending him back to Israel, which I had actually thought for many years now, I guess. And it actually makes sense because obviously we just talked about the song, which is mentioned in verse 5. And obviously David was a mighty warrior. So you really, really wouldn't want to send him back to the people you're about to fight, would you? You just say, okay, he's not coming to battle for us because we're going to fight his people and he might actually turn in the battle. So just send him back to where you've allowed him to stay and he can't come to the battle with us. Now, what does this also bring up? What we see here in verse 8, which is really powerful. David says to Achish, why can't I go and fight against the enemies of my Lord, talking about Achish specifically. And what that basically means is David was willing to fight against the Israelites because that's who they were actually going to fight, which is actually really insightful. By the end of the day, verse 11, David actually heads on home, but not Israel. He goes home to Ziklag, which is where he's been dwelling for months and years, etc. And it came to pass when David and his men were come to Ziklag on the third day that the Amalekites had invaded the south and Ziklag and smitten Ziklag and burned it with fire, and had taken the women captives that therein. They slew not any, either great or small, but carried away and went on their way. So David and his men came to the city, and behold, burned with fire, and their wives and their sons and their daughters were taken captives. Then David and the people that with him lifted up their voice and wept until they had no more power to weep. And David's two wives were taken captives, Ahinoam the Jezreelitess, and Abigail the wife of Nabal the Carmelite. And David was greatly distressed, for the people spake of stoning him, because the soul of all the people was grieved, every man for his sons and for his daughters. But David encouraged himself in the Lord his God. And David said to Abiathar the priest, Ahimelech's son, I pray thee, bring me hither the ephod. And Abiathar brought thither the ephod to David. And David inquired at the Lord, saying, shall I pursue after this troop? Shall I overtake them? And he answered him, pursue, for thou shalt surely overtake, and without fail recover. So what do we see to start? We see that Ziklag, the place that the Philistine lords have sent him back to, has basically been invaded by the Amalekites. Now, isn't this interesting? The people that God had told Saul previously, about 13 chapters previously in the book of Samuel, to wipe out, he failed to wipe them out, and now these people are now coming to invade where David actually is in Ziklag. So this is so severe, so much to the point that you can see in verse 6 that David's life's at risk. The people actually want to stone him. But notice this. Compare how David reacts. It says David strengthened himself in the Lord. If you compare that to what Saul did in the previous piece of text with the woman with the familiar spirit in Endor, Saul got more fearful as things got worse and worse, or it seemed like things were getting worse and worse. But where things were getting worse and worse for David, you saw in verse 5 that David strengthened himself in the Lord and actually didn't crumble. He went to seek the priest and called him to him and said, you know what, let's inquire at God's hand and see what God actually says. Now, David acts in faith, and what does God do? God basically says to him, you will recover all that has actually been gone. And this is something that's actually really, really vital. So David went, he and the 600 men that with him, and came to the brook Bezor, where those that were left behind stayed. But David pursued, he and 400 men, for 200 abode behind, which was so faint that they could not go over the brook Bezor. And they found an Egyptian in the field, and brought him to David, and gave him bread, and he did eat. And they made him drink water. And they gave him a piece of a cake of figs, and 2 clusters of raisins. And when he had eaten, his spirit came again to him. For he had eaten no bread, nor drunk water, 3 days and 3 nights. 13. And David said unto him, To whom thou, and whence thou? And he said, I, a young man of Egypt, servant to an Amalekite, and my master left me, because 3 days agone I fell sick. We made an invasion the south of the Cherethites, and upon which to Judah, and upon the south of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag with fire. And David said to him, Canst thou bring me down to this company? And he said, Swear unto me by God that thou wilt neither kill me, nor deliver me into the hands of my master, and I will bring thee down to this company. And when he had brought him down, behold, spread abroad upon all the earth, eating and drinking and dancing, because of all the great spoil that they had taken out of the land of the Philistines and out of the land of Judah. For most of the time David's been on the run, we've heard about David being with 600 men. But in this particular scenario, 200 men stayed behind and didn't cross over the brook because they were so tired, basically, from just, I guess, traveling and battling, etc. But the bulk of what we read is really insight, because we get insights from this Egyptian between verse 11 to 15 who basically spills all the beans. And the key lesson I put down here, which I think is really vital for you to understand, is that treat your people with respect. The fact of the matter is, this Amalekite had this Egyptian person as a servant, and he basically felt ill. He didn't say to himself, well, this Amalekite is my servant. He's been working for me for X amount of months or years or days. Instead of me basically saying to him, and instead of me basically helping him and getting him back to recovery, I'm basically going to cast him away. And what do you know? The same person that they cast away is the same person that basically now came to spill the beans to David, and is basically going to be their ultimate demise. And 16 is really funny because what do we see? They're so happy from the reward they basically just got from taking over Judah's territory and basically taking over some of the Philistine territory, that they're there singing, dancing, and basically getting so excited and partying basically because of what they've actually achieved. And David smote them from the twilight even unto the evening of the next day. And there escaped not a man of them, save 400 young men which rode upon camels and fled. 18. And David recovered all that the Amalekites had carried away, and David rescued his 2 wives. 19. And there was nothing lacking to them, neither small nor great, neither sons nor daughters, neither spoil, nor that they had taken to them. David recovered all. And David took all the flocks and the herds they drave before those cattle, and said, This David spoil. And David came to the 200 men which were so faint that they could not follow David, whom they had made also to abide at the brook Bezor. And they went forth to meet David and to meet the people that with him. And when David came near to the people, he saluted them. Then answered all the wicked men of Belial of those that went with David, and said, Because they went not with us, we will not give them of the spoil that we have recovered, save to every man his wife and his children, that they may lead away and depart. Then said David, Ye shall not do so, my brethren, with that which the Lord hath given us, who have preserved us and delivered the company that came against us into our hand. For who will hearken unto you in this matter? But as his part that goeth down to the battle, so his part that tarrieth by the stuff, they shall part alike. Now, one thing I want to bring up is verse 18, where it basically talks about how David got his 2 wives back. And the reason I want to bring it up is because we've read this a couple of times now in the video today, which is basically specifically talking about David's 2 wives. Now, I've mentioned this in previous videos. I'll mention it again in today's video as well, if anyone wondering and getting caught. For anyone basically jumping into these videos for the first time at this particular point. And the fact of the matter is this. God has said in the Old Testament that the king shouldn't multiply wives. Now, the fact of the matter is, a lot of the drama in David's life will be the result of him marrying multiple women. So I wanted to bring it up here again, just to show you that having multiple wives is a really big problem in the scriptures and not something that is advisable. But we also see in verse 19 that as the Lord had said, you will recover all, just as the Lord said, David was actually able to recover all. Wives, sons, daughters, spoil, everything was basically restored to the former situation. Now, something that was really interesting is between 21 to 24, which is these wicked men that actually went off with David. And that gives you some insights in itself already, that not everyone that was rolling with David was actually righteous and was into this whole God thing. There were some wicked men amongst them. And they basically said, you know what? These 200 men didn't go to battle with us. They shouldn't get any of the spoil of the battle. But David basically says, look, you know what? even though they didn't go to the battle, we should still give them a portion, and no one's going to side with you in this matter. So this is what's actually going to happen. Now, I mentioned down here Numbers 31 in brackets because it's something I think you should consider. And for those of you who don't know, I'll give you a quick rundown. This is basically where God had told Israel to basically go out and wipe out the Midianites. These were people that had basically caused Israel to sin and were basically trying to kill the Israelites in many different ways. And when basically they went to wipe them out, they had basically brought back the spoil. And God basically said to them through Moses that, look, set aside a portion for the people that went to battle and set aside another portion for those that went to war. God had basically said to them, set aside a portion a bit more for those that went to battle. Now set aside a different portion for those that, for the rest of the congregation basically, that didn't go to war. So this is actually kind of similar to that, but the way kind of David kind of structured it this way is he's basically now kind of made it in the sense that even though they didn't go to battle, the 200 should get equal spoil to those that did go to battle, which is actually really interesting. And it was from that day forward that he made it a statute and an ordinance for Israel unto this day. And when David came to Ziklag, he sent of the spoil unto the elders of Judah, to his friends, saying, behold, a present for you of the spoil of the enemies of the Lord, to which in Bethel, and to which in South Ramoth, and to which in Jatir, and to which in Aroer, and to which in Sifmoth, and to which in Eshtemoa, and to which in Rakel, and to which in the cities of Jeremielites, and to which in the cities of the Kenites, and to which in Hormah, and to which in Korashan, and to which in Aphek, and to which in Hebron, and to all the places where David himself and his men were wont to haunt. Now, like I kind of alluded to already, verse 25 makes it ever so clear that yes, there was this kind of similar kind of concept in Numbers 31, but in verse 25 it's basically established basically that this is a new law that David set, where everyone basically is to get a part, whether you've gone to the battle, whether you haven't gone to the battle for whatever reason. Now 26 to 31 is actually really interesting, and I just basically wrote that David is a very smart guy. Why? Because he's just gone to battle, and what does he do? He sends gifts all around from the spoil that he's got to his companions in many of the different cities that he was actually staying in or dwelling in. And this is really interesting when you think about the overall context, that he was at one point on the run, traveling around to different places, different cities through Israel and in Philistine country, looking for somewhere for safe haven because Saul was on his tail. Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell down slain in Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines followed hard upon Saul and upon his sons, and the Philistines slew Jonathan and Abinadab and Malchishua, Saul's sons. 3. And the battle went sore against Saul, and the archers hit him, and he was sore wounded of the archers. Then said Saul unto his armor-bearer, draw thy sword and thrust me through therewith, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and abuse me. But his armor-bearer would not, for he was sore afraid. Therefore Saul took a sword and fell upon it. And when his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he fell likewise upon his sword, and died with him. So Saul died, and his 3 sons, and his armor-bearer, and all his men that same day together. And when the men of Israel that on the other side of the valley, and that on the other side Jordan, saw that the men of Israel fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they forsook the cities and fled, and the Philistines came and dwelt in them. And it came to pass on the morrow, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, that they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen in Mount Gilboa. And they cut off his head and stripped off his armor, and sent into the land of the Philistines round about to publish the house of their idols and among the people. And they put his armor in the house of Ashtaroth, and they fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan. And when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard of that which the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and went all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Bethshan, and came to Jabesh and burnt them there. And they took their bones and buried under a tree at Jabesh, and fasted 7 days. Now Saul was actually taken out in Mount Gilboa with his 3 sons, and it's really interesting the way the scripture talks about his demise. He was basically hit with an arrow, and then he basically fell upon his own sword and died that way because he didn't want the Philistines to come and basically abuse him. But ultimately what happens in the end anyway? The next day when they're basically going through to see all the different bodies, they see Saul and his sons, and they basically chop off his head and basically send him around Philistine country, and basically are putting him in their idols' houses basically as a sign of like worship to their god Ashtaroth. And Jabesh Gilead basically hear about what's actually going on in that scenario. They basically get all their strong men and basically go and fight them and basically recover Saul's body and basically take him back to Israelite towns. Now, if you're wondering why Jabesh Gilead went and done this, I'm going to refer you to Judges 21 for some additional context and basically what the connection is there. So the book of First Samuel is actually done. And if you want to continue with us on this theme of through the Bible in 1 year, definitely subscribe to the channel. And I recommend you watch this video right here. It's a great video for you to watch based on what we just covered in today's video, because it gets into some more details about what David actually did through the book of First Samuel. Thanks and take care.